Hi there, this is Scott Nicholson, host of Board Games with Scott. A lot of people ask me this question, Scott, what's your favorite game? Now I have kind of a cheap answer that I use for that, and I say, it's not so much about the game, it's about the game experience, and it's about matching up the game with the people. So I really don't have a favorite game because it really matters on who I'm playing with. I want to make sure and match that game to those people, because if you have a great game and people that don't match the game, you're going to have a bad game experience. And same thing if you have annoying people, but you've got a good game, again, you're going to have a bad game experience. Still, people press me, they said, no, tell me what your real favorite game is. And my favorite game is a game called Puerto Rico. Now, I've listed this on Board Game Geek. I have information about myself there and what games I like. And so I've gotten a number of emails and messages from people saying, Scott, you say Puerto Rico is your favorite game. Why haven't you done a show on it? And to be honest, it's because I've been scared. It's a fairly complex game, and there's a lot that goes on here, and it's kind of hard to explain, but I've decided to give it a shot. So, let's see how this goes. Buckle up, and it's time for a ride on the Puerto Rico Express. Hi there, welcome to Board Games with Scott. This is a video series where I take board games and explain them and lightly review them. My goal is to help you decide if it's a game that you would like to purchase and help you understand what you're getting into. This week, the game I'm going to talk about is called Puerto Rico. Now, Puerto Rico is currently the top-rated game on the Board Game Geek website. Out of all the board games out there, the people really into gaming have picked this game as their favorite game. It's been around for a number of years. It was published in the US by Rio Grande Games. Now, why do I like this game? This game for me is like a toy. It's like a box of Legos. You get to make your own fun in the game. You can build your own machine and see how well that runs. And I'll explain all of that as I get into the game. But let's get right to that. Let's see what's inside this box. So what comes with the Puerto Rico game? Well, it's a game that comes with a lot of stuff. You get all sorts of bits and counters and things, and I'll talk about them now. First, you get a rule book, and the rule book's pretty well done. The way they've done the rules is they give you some nice running sidebar here explaining some of what's going on in the main text, but you can just review the sidebar to remind yourself of what you're supposed to do. So they did a good job with the rule book. Now, with the game, each player is going to get one of these boards. And these boards are going to represent your little piece of the island. And so you're going to have your plantations down here, and you're going to have buildings up here. One neat thing about the board is if you look here, down here on the plantations, you can see a picture of San Juan, and that's actually represented here on the top of the board where you place your buildings. And then there's a board that sits in the middle of the table, and this board has all of the different buildings you can choose from. As you can see, there are a lot of buildings, and the board shows you where to place each building. One of the things to realize is that there aren't enough buildings for every player to have one of every building. They are limited in their number, and the number that you put out depends upon the number of players that you have. So that's a method the game uses to actually control the setup for the game. You use different numbers of components in all of these components for the different numbers of players that you have. You have little cardboard chips to represent the different types of plantations that will go onto your board like this. And the buildings are going to go up on the top part of your board like so. So all of these buildings and plantations have little white spaces where you can put workers, and the workers are going to go on those spaces. That indicates that you can then use that plantation, or you can use that building. There's going to be a lot of these heavy-duty cardboard chips that come with the game, because you're going to use these a lot. The trading house, the ships, and then there's this stuff, which I haven't talked about yet, the roll cards. And this is actually the neatest part of the whole game, but I'll get to that a little bit later. And you've got chips for victory points and chips for money. And then you've got little wooden bits. You've got lots of little wooden cylinders here that are going to be your goods. And I have to thank them for not actually making them cylinders, but making them sort of octagons here so that they don't roll around too much. And then you have these little workers, these discs here. So that's what comes with the game. You get a lot of cardboard chips, but it's all heavy-duty cardboard. I've played this game probably hundreds of times, and this is my copy, and you can see everything's in pretty good shape. So all weathers a lot of handling fairly well. But let's see how all this now works together. So in order to teach you Puerto Rico, I'm going to start with the goals of the game, and then I'm going to work my way back to how you reach those goals, and then later on I'll get into the gameplay. The gameplay is very interesting, but I think it would be confusing for you if I started with that. So I'm going to start with the goals. Now the goal of the game is to get victory points. Victory points are going to be represented by these chips throughout the game, these little red chips, and then at the end of the game you're going to have a chance to get some as well. You get these victory points through two main ways. The first is through buildings. You're going to have a number of these buildings that you're going to be able to build throughout the game. And up in the top right-hand corner is a purple number, and that is going to tell you how many victory points this building is worth at the end of the game. And so the victory points usually range from 1 to 4, but there are also some ways to get bonus victory points from these buildings. There's going to be large buildings like this, and these large buildings will give you bonus points at the end of the game. So that's one way of getting points at the end of the game, is by building buildings. The other way of getting points throughout the game is by shipping goods. Now, what you're doing in Puerto Rico is you are a wealthy landowner. You've been sent to Puerto Rico to attempt to raise money and raise goods and create buildings and send things back home. And so another way to get victory points in the game is by shipping goods back home. Throughout the game, you're going to have the ability to make different types of goods: corn and tobacco and sugar and indigo and coffee. And when you ship those goods home, you're going to get 1 victory point per good that you ship home. Now, there are a lot of ways to get more than that one, but that's the base. For each good you ship home, regardless of the type, you get 1 victory point. So how is it that you get these things? You get these things through money. You get money in order to build buildings. And so, but notice that money doesn't help you with victory points. All the buildings have a number in the bottom left-hand corner that's a gray number, and that tells you the cost, how much gold you have to pay to be able to build that building. So the buildings are going to have 2 numbers. The number in purple on the top is the number of victory points you get at the end of the game. The number in gray that's on the bottom, on the left, is how much it costs you to be able to play that building. So how do you get crops? Well, in order to get crops, you have to do a couple different things. First, you have to produce the raw materials for that crop. So you're going to have these small little plantation squares. Like there's one for coffee, there's one for corn, things like that. And so one of these gives you the potential to produce 1 good. But many of the goods have to be manufactured. So in order to actually create coffee, not only do you have to have coffee on your plantation, but you have to have a coffee roaster, which is a type of building. So you'll have coffee and a coffee roaster, and they'll work together to help you to create a coffee good. Now, corn does not require manufacturing, so if you have a corn field in your plantation, it will produce a corn good. Now, there's one exception to all of this, and that's that these things don't produce themselves. You just grow corn. It's not going to magically turn into corn waiting to be shipped away. And you have a building. I have a warehouse here. It's not going to work without having someone there. And so in the game, you'll have workers. You'll have these discs which represent workers, and throughout the game, you will be able to man your buildings and man your fields with workers. Wherever you see a white circle, that's where a worker can go. Some of the buildings have multiple white circles, and what that means is you can employ multiple workers on there. So let's say, for example, we'll look at the indigo plant. Now, the indigo plant has 3 white circles on it. That means I could have up to 3 workers there. So if I have 3 indigo fields, and if each one has a worker, and I have an indigo plant that has 3 spaces and it has 3 workers, then when I activate this, it will produce 3 barrels of indigo. And that's what I can ship home for victory points. If you have this situation where you have 2 plantations that are manned, but only 1 man in the factory, then you're only going to produce 1 good of that type. So that's how you produce goods. You have to have fields with that type of good that has to have a worker on it. You have to have the processing plant with workers on it, and then those combine to produce the goods. Now, these buildings all cost money. So, how do you get money? Well, there's something else you can do with your goods, and that is sell your goods at the trading house. Now, the trading house gives you a different amount of money for each type of good. So it's a little different than the ships. When you send your goods home, it's 1 victory point per barrel. They don't care what it is. Just give us something. With the trading house, though, it makes a difference. The harder a good is to produce, the more money you get for it at the trading house. So to run through all of this again, you're going to have your island, and on the island is where you're going to put your plantation. So I may have an indigo plantation. I will then have a building that will allow me to process that indigo. I have to have workers on both. Doing that, when I activate that, that's going to make a good, an indigo good. Then that good can either be sold to the trading house for cash. That cash can be used to buy more buildings, or it can be shipped home for a victory point. The trigger for the end of the game is when one player fills up their building area, or you run out of victory point markers, or you run out of workers. At the end of the game, the buildings are going to give you victory points. The goods that you have shipped home have earned you victory points throughout the game. You're going to total that up, add in any bonuses, and see who wins. So that's a brief overview of what you're trying to do in Puerto Rico. But what makes the game interesting is the gameplay. The flow of play in Puerto Rico is governed by these cards. Now, unlike a normal game where you take a number of actions during your turn, then it's the next player's turn and they do a bunch of stuff, Puerto Rico has torn apart that model. So given what I've talked to you about so far, it might make sense that on your turn, you're going to get some workers, buy some buildings, produce some goods, ship some goods home, or sell the goods. But it doesn't work that way in the game, and this is what is really interesting about the game. On your turn, you get to choose one of these actions to take. You take that action, and then going around the table, each other player gets a chance to take that action, in most cases. And so each of these actions triggers something different that goes on in the game. So for example, if you take the mayor, then what that's going to do is allow everyone to get more workers. If you take the builder, then everyone's going to get to build more buildings, etc. And so when it's your turn, you can pick the action that is most beneficial to you. Now, if you're the one that picks it, you're going to get an advantage and you're going to get to do it first. So the way that all this works is one player is going to have the governor, and that player picks first. You then go around the table and everyone else takes one pick. So if I take the builder, I'll take the chit. No one else can have it. Then someone else might say, well, I'll take captain. All right. The next player might say, you know, I think I need to do mayor. That's gone. Next player just takes the prospector and gets a buck. And the final player says, you know, I want to do settler. So at this point, when you come back to the player who has the governor, you stop and you put one doubloon on the rolls that were not selected. And then what that means is that next turn, if you take one of those rolls that have a doubloon, you get the doubloon as well. So what will happen during the game is rolls that aren't very valuable will pile up with doubloons until finally someone says, all right, I'll take craftsman, and takes all the money on top of it. So that'll build up as the game goes on. So this is a very clever way of breaking apart the turns, keeping everyone engaged quite often, but giving you a lot of strategic choices to determine what you want to do. So now let's talk about each of these a little bit more in depth. When someone picks the mayor phase, what you do is you look at the colonist ship and you divide up the colonists that are coming over on the ship equally amongst the players. And you start with the person who picked mayor. So let's say that there were 4 players, but there were 5 on the ship. That means you'd give 1 to the person who picked mayor, go around the table giving 1 to each player. There'd be 1 left over and the mayor would get it. And then on top of whatever's on the ship, the mayor gets 1 additional colonist to put wherever they would like. The other thing that happens in the mayor phase is you can put your new colonists to work and you can move people around on your board. So let's say I just got 2 more colonists and this was my board. So what I might do is look and say, all right, well, what do I want to get here? I see I have the capacity, if I put 1 on the sugar and 1 in the sugar mill, that I would be able to produce another sugar if that came up. But I also could do the same thing with coffee. And so I don't have enough people to be able to spread out. So what I might do is I might put 1 on coffee and 1 up here on the coffee roaster. And I might say, you know, corn isn't very valuable to me. I might want to do something else with that. So I might put 1 over here on the coffee, move the guy from the corn to the coffee. And then we'll take 1 off of the sugar, put him on the coffee roaster. So at this point I can produce 2 coffee. I can see that. I can produce 1 sugar. This guy's extra right now, so I could take him, put him back on the corn. And so at that point I can be done. So during the mayor phase, you can move people around and figure out the best way to use your workers. A building without a worker or a plantation without a worker does nothing for you. So you have to balance the workers. At the end of that, when everyone's done making their plans, you count the number of empty worker spaces people have on their buildings. Not down here, just up here. Count the number of spaces and report the number. You total that up between all of the players, and that's how many workers go on the colonist ship for next turn. It's minimum of the number of players. So if everyone has all their buildings full, then you'll have 1 colonist per player. But if people have lots of gaps in their buildings, then you may have more. The next possibility is settler. Now at any one point you're going to have 1 of these plantation tiles flipped up for each player in the game. These are going to be flipped up randomly, and if you choose settler phase you get to take 1 of them and move them over onto your plantation. So if I were to choose settler, I might say, you know, I still have the capacity to make more sugar, so I'm going to take this sugar and put it on my board. And you go around and everyone takes a pick. Now, the player who takes a settler phase has the advantage of also taking a quarry. What the quarry does is it makes your buildings one cheaper. I'll talk about that more in detail here in a minute. But what's important to note is that it doesn't do anything again until you have a worker on it. So it will sit there being useless until someone picks the mayor phase, and then you get a worker on it, and then it can be activated. There's only 8 quarries in the entire game, so if you want quarries, you better take them early, because they will go away. All right, next we'll talk about the builder phase. So in the builder phase, the player who picked it gets to build first. They can purchase one building off the board, and then it goes around. There's a limited number of buildings of each type, and the player who played the builder gets a discount of 1 doubloon on their building. Now again, to remind you, the numbers in purple or red up here in the top right corners, that's the victory points you get. The cost is the number on the bottom left here in the circle that's kind of grayed out. At the beginning of the game, you're only going to be able to afford these here. And then as the game goes on, you'll have more choices. Every one of these purple tiles is different. And this is the most overwhelming part of the game, is all of a sudden you're faced with, 16 different types of buildings to choose from. But the reality is you're only going to have a few to choose from. And then as players buy them, they're not even going to be a choice for you anymore. So don't feel overwhelmed. Now, what these buildings do is they allow you to break the rules of the game. There's buildings to adjust many of the rules, and many times if you're trying to do something more effectively, you may want to look, there's probably a building that will let you do that. I'm going to run through some of the simpler buildings, but I'm not going to run through everything because that would take way too long. So first you have these up here, and these are your factories, and these are how you're going to take the raw materials produced in your plantation and manufacture them. As I mentioned earlier, this small indigo plant, for example, costs 1. It can hold 1 worker. So it could take the results from a single indigo plantation and process it into 1 indigo good. The indigo plant in comparison costs 3. It's got 3 spaces for workers, which means it could take the output from up to 3 different spaces in your plantation and process them into up to 3 goods. So you have the same thing with the sugar. You have the cheaper one that only does 1, and the more expensive one that does 3. Tobacco and coffee are very expensive. They're also worth more if you sell the things for gold, but there's not 2 levels. There's just 1 type of tobacco storage and 1 type of coffee roaster. Now let me run through some of the basic buildings. There are things that make it better for you to sell goods. The small market and the large market give you extra money when you sell goods. The hacienda gets you an extra plantation. Whenever you take the settler phase, you can take a random extra plantation for free. The construction hut lets you get a quarry anytime you are settling, so you don't just have to pick settler to get the quarry. If you have the construction hut, you can get a quarry every time. That's only useful in the early part of the game, and then it's not so useful anymore. The warehouses will allow you to keep your goods from spoiling. I haven't talked about that yet, but I'll get to it. The office allows you to sell the same type of goods as someone else. The hospice gives you a free colonist whenever you settle. Whenever you get one of those plantations, you get a free worker. And then there are the more complex buildings. The factory gives you money when you produce different types of goods. The university gives you free colonists when you build. The harbor gives you extra victory points whenever you deliver goods. And the wharf also helps you in the delivery phase. And these big buildings over here, there's only 1 of each type, and these are the bonus point buildings. They're going to give you bonus points for different things. This one, for example, gives you different amounts of victory points for having these buildings. So if you've built a lot of buildings, you're going to want to build this particular bonus chit. There's another one that gives you bonus points for the number of spaces you have occupied with your plantation. So if you built a lot of things in your plantation, you want that one. This one gives you bonus points for colonists. This one gives you bonus points for victory point chips, and so on. So near the end of the game, these cost 10. They're very expensive, but near the end of the game, you want to look and see what you've done a lot of, and then get the matching victory point building. Notice the rocks at the top. Earlier I talked about the quarries, and the quarries make it cheaper for you to buy these buildings. If you have 1 manned quarry, everything is 1 cheaper. If you have 2 manned quarries, then you can count those 2 against these 3 columns, but not this one. So this rock is showing you that you can apply at most 1 manned quarry to the buildings in this column. The 2 rocks up here means you can apply the effects of up to 2 quarries to this column. 3 rocks means you can apply up to 3 quarries here, and 4 rocks means you can apply up to 4 quarries here. By the way, if you're confused by all of this, the building phase is the most difficult phase because you have so many choices. Just know that when you play the game, you're only going to have to worry about these cheap buildings at the beginning, and then as you build up, it'll make more sense to you. Puerto Rico is an experience game. It's one you're really going to learn only by sitting down and playing, not by one you're going to take in this rules description. When someone picks the craftsman phase, then people are going to get to produce whatever they can. And again, to produce, you look to see where you match up. You see, okay, do I have a plantation with a worker? Yes, that has the capacity to produce. Do I have a building that can then manufacture it? Yes. So between this sugar with 1 and this sugar mill with 1, it will allow me to produce 1 sugar. How many coffee can I produce? Well, I have 2 coffee plantations, both have a worker, and I have 2 workers in my coffee roaster, so therefore I get to make 2 coffee. Corn is very easy. Corn does not require a building. So for each occupied corn, I get 1 corn. How many tobacco? Can you figure that out? 1 tobacco. I have 1 tobacco plantation and 1 worker in tobacco storage. I have the capacity to put 2 more here and get 2 more tobacco plantations there. And if I get workers on them, then I'll produce more. But right now, I'm only going to produce 1. So that would be my output from a craftsman phase. 1 sugar, 2 coffee, 1 corn, and 1 tobacco. This will be limited by the number of these that are in the game. And so again, with craftsman, you go with the player who picked it and go around the table. And if you run out, then you're out and you get out of luck. If you're the one that picked the craftsman, then after everyone's gotten their goods they produce, you get to pick 1 additional good of the type you produced from the supply. So in my case, I know coffee is the most valuable, so I might say, well, I'm going to go ahead and take another coffee. This is where the factory comes into play. If it is manned, for each different type of resource you produce, you're going to get some doubloons at this stage. So for example, if you produce 3 different types of resources, you'll get 2 extra doubloons. That's what the numbers across the top of this chit tell you. Note that you only get the bonus if you actually are able to produce the goods. If they're out of that type of good and you don't actually create the good, you don't get the bonus. That's how the craftsman phase works. Now let's talk about how the captain phase works. Now the captain is how you're going to sail your goods home to get points. Remember earlier in the game I talked about that the one way to get points is by shipping your barrels of goods home. And you're going to do that when someone picks the captain phase. Now in this one, turn order is quite important because there's only going to be 3 ships. Now with 3 players, for example, you'd use these 3 ships, a ship with 4, 5, and 6 spaces. With more players, you'd have bigger ships. And the way the captain phase works is the person who picked captain gets to go first, and they pick 1 type of good, and they must load all that they have of that type of good onto a ship. Now the captain phase, this loading is mandatory. If you can do it, you must do it. You can't hang on to something hoping to get some points a bit later on. So let's say that this player picked the captain phase. So this player is going to look and see they have 2 tobacco, 4 sugar, and an indigo. They can look and see what other players have. You can see that the other players don't have a lot of sugar. So what this player might do is this player might say, well, all right, I'm going to take these 4 sugar, I'm going to put them on this ship. You get to choose which ship. Now the ships do not empty out until they're full. And then none of them empty out immediately. So if the ships all fill up, the captain phase is over, and then any full ships will empty out. If the ship remains with spaces on it, then it'll stay that way, and the next time you pick captain phase, the ships are going to already have stuff on them. So that player loads up the sugar and is going to get 4 points right away. 1 point per thing that they put on there. So now this player is going to look and say, well, I've got a lot of blue I want to try and get rid of. So this player may take this ship and say, well, I'm going to load these 3 blue on here. This player then gets 3 points for loading that up. You don't get the points when they sail, you get the points when you load. So now this player says, well, all right, I might be in trouble here. I definitely want to get my coffee going, so they might send these 3 coffee away on the small ship. Again, that player will get 3 points for those coffee. So now at this point, the 3 ship types are set, which means corn and tobacco have nowhere to go. I'll talk about what happens to that in a minute. Now you keep going around. So this player can say, all right, well, I'll go ahead and load this 1 indigo there. This player can't load anything at all. This player can load the sugar, get a point for that. Now, the advantage of being the captain is that if you successfully load at least 1 good onto a ship, you get an extra victory point. So you go around until everyone has loaded what they can. At this point, spoilage happens. Now, what happens with spoilage is you may only keep 1 good of 1 type at the end of the captain phase. So at this point, this player is going to have to get rid of 1 of these 2 because he can only keep 1 good of 1 type. This player has to make the same choice. You might say, well, I'll keep the corn. This player has to make the same choice. And that's what happens in spoilage. So if you hoard a bunch of resources, you might find that you're not going to be able to deal with them all and they'll spoil. There are ways around this. The warehouses, as I talked about earlier, allow you to keep more goods around. The small warehouse lets you keep 1 extra kind of goods plus the 1 barrel. So for example, if this player had this and had a small warehouse, they could keep all the corn plus 1 barrel of 1 type of good. The large warehouse lets you keep 2 types of good. So the warehouses help you keep stuff around. The other things that can come into play here are the harbor and the wharf. The harbor gives you an extra victory point for delivery. What that means is every time you put stuff on a ship, you get an extra victory point, and that can really pile up. Another important building is a wharf. And the idea with the wharf is it's a Klingon that always gets beat up by the stupid little stuff. Oh, wait, sorry, no. The idea of the wharf is it lets you have your very own ship. So if this player had the wharf building and it was manned, they could say, and I'm going to load these 2 corn onto my invisible little ship and get 2 points, and they'll sail away. And so that's the way that the shipping phase works. At the end of this particular shipping phase, none of these ships would sail because they all have spaces, which means the next captain phase is going to be pretty paltry. There's only spaces for 3 things to be loaded. The trading phase is how you get to sell your goods for money. Money doesn't get you victory points, but it can help you buy more buildings. And so the way the trading phase works is, again, the player who picks trader gets to go first. Now the trading house is different than the ships in that the trading house takes 1 barrel of each type of good. You can't have duplicate goods in the trading house. So let's say this player picked trader. So this player said, I'm going to do trading. They see that there's 4 spaces in the trading house. They may have a coffee and say, well, I'm going to go ahead and sell that coffee. That player would then get 4 doubloons. This player could not then sell coffee. But the trading house wants variety. But this player may say, well, I'll go ahead and sell tobacco. So I get 3 doubloons for that. Then this player says, well, all right, I've got one of these sugars I can sell. So it sells the sugar and gets 2 doubloons. And then that ends the trading phase. Unlike the shipping phase, which goes around and around and around until everyone's done, in the trading phase, everyone only gets 1 shot. Now what comes into play here are the office. The office will allow you to sell the same type of goods. So if this were the situation and there was a new trading phase, this player had the office, this player could sell one of these even though there was one already sold. The market allows you to get more money. So with the small market, you get +1, the large market +2. If you have them both, you get +3. So you could have the small market and the large market and sell corn and still get that base of 3. At the end of the trading phase, the trading house only empties if it is completely full. Otherwise, it's going to stay like this. The next time someone picks trader, there's only going to be a single choice for them. And now for something simple, with the prospector, you take a buck. No one else gets anything. Commonly, people will not take the prospector for turn after turn after turn, and so it'll get doubloons piled on at every turn when no one takes it. And then you'll finally take it, and you'll get that +1. And so that can be a nice payout after a few turns of passing. So those are the phases of the game. On your turn, you're going to pick one of these things. If it's available, you'll take that cardboard chit and do the action, then everyone else gets to do the action. Again, to remind you, the settler is how you get these little chips for your plantation. The mayor is how you get workers. The builder is how you buy a building. The craftsman is how you produce these goods based upon your combination of plantations and buildings. The trader is how you sell the goods out for cash. The captain is how you sail the goods home for victory points. And the prospector just gets you a buck. It says here we have action and privilege. And the privilege, this is what you get if you're the person that picks the action. Everyone gets to do what's on action. So the game ends in one of 3 ways. 1, if you run out of these victory point chips, the game ends. 2, if you run out of these little workers, the game ends. 3, someone builds all of their buildings. If someone fills up all 12 spaces, the game ends. The game will end at the end of that round, so everyone's going to get a turn until you come around to the governor. And then at that point, you calculate your scores. Now, to figure the final scores, you add up the number of victory point chips that you've had. Now, these have been secret throughout the game. Remember, you're going to get these from shipping the goods. 1 chip per good. And then you add up the purple numbers on all of these buildings, the ones in the top right-hand corner. And then finally, you add in any bonuses that you might have for these special buildings. Let's take a look at 2 of the special buildings just to see how they come into play. So the City Hall, again, it only gets me the victory points if I have a worker there. 1 victory point for each violet building. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 violet buildings. I get 6 bonus points for that tile, plus the 4 that it gives me for being a building. So that tile alone is worth 10 points. The residents give you victory points based upon the number of occupied island spaces that you have. So let's look at that. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 occupied island spaces. So I can see from that, I get a bonus 5 victory points. So the 5 victory points plus the 4 already on the tile, that tile alone is going to be worth 9 points at the end of the game. These tiles are pretty important. And usually if you don't get one of them and other players got one, you're not going to win the game because they're pretty big bumps. So you usually want to watch when other players are going for the big buildings, you want to try and get one as well because that signals that the end of the game is coming. What's clever about the game and these different ending conditions is players can force them. Someone can try and rush to the end by building a bunch of buildings. Or someone can try and run through all the colonists by choosing the mayor phase all the time. Or someone can get a lot of those little victory point chips by choosing shipping all the time. So the game's going to end at different rates based upon the strategies that different players are using. What I like about Puerto Rico is at the end of the game you can look and you see you have this machine that you've built. You've got these plantations, you've got these buildings, you've got workers, you can see sort of what you constructed. At the end of the game you feel like you've accomplished a little something because you've made this machine. And what's neat about the game is that each game you play, the different purple buildings that you get allow you to break the rules in different ways. And so every time you try, you can try it with different strategies and say, oh, that didn't work, I'm going to try going for the office this time and selling a lot of stuff. And that's why this game is so popular. Every time you play, you can try different combinations of purple buildings and see how well they work for you. And that's what's neat about Puerto Rico. Well, that's Puerto Rico. Hopefully you were able to keep up with me, and this is going to be a difficult game to walk away from this video really understanding how it plays, because the game is all about the interaction between all these different components you've seen. The buildings that you pick each time and how they work together and how they work compared to what other people have picked. That's where the neat parts of the game come out. Right now you're probably saying, wow, there's a lot there and there's no way I can handle it. But the way the game ramps up is fairly good. You only have a limited number of choices at the beginning, and then as it goes on and you get more comfortable with it, then you're able to deal with more choices. So if you're interested in trying Puerto Rico, I'd say look for a local board game group in your area. I would wager someone in that group probably has this game because it is a very popular game. I have one warning for you about Puerto Rico. It's a game that's best played by people of similar experience levels. Many people have studied Puerto Rico like chess. And because of that, they're to a point where there are certain moves that are expected. There are things that are programmed that are the most optimal choices to make during the game. And some of these folks can get frustrated if you don't know those optimal choices. And so I've known of a number of experiences where new people to Puerto Rico were paired up with experienced players, and the experienced players got very frustrated because the new people wanted to explore the game and think about things, and the experienced people knew, well, there's only one good choice here, why don't you hurry up and take it? So because of that, it's going to be best in your early games if you're with other people that are new to the game. Or you're with very patient, experienced people who understand that you're new and will let you explore the game. One of the best tips I can give you about Puerto Rico is to watch the player on your left. What I mean by that is whenever you make a choice, take a second and see how it's going to affect the next player. Because that's probably the most common thing a new player can do to help that next player win the game, is making choices that are very advantageous for that player. Here's an example. Let's say I could choose Craftsman, and if I choose Craftsman, I'm going to get a lot of stuff. But I look and I see the next player over. If I choose Craftsman, then he'll be set up in order to take advantage of the captain phase or the trading house and do really well. If I continually do that, making choices that benefit that next player more than me, I'm going to help that next player win the game, and the other players in the game will be frustrated. So the basic strategy is you always want to make sure that what you're doing is not helping the next player over more than it's helping you. And actually that strategy applies to everyone at the table. If everyone is keeping that next player in check, then you'll prevent situations where you help someone out quite a bit. As you get more advanced in the game, you'll learn to actually watch what everyone's up to. There's also a card game sequel to Puerto Rico called San Juan, which has many of the same elements, but is more luck-based, so it's more appropriate for players of different experience levels. So that's it for this episode of Board Games with Scott. There are plenty more on the website for you to watch, and I'll be putting out some more in the future. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Hey, it's Scott here. If you watch this all the way to the end, I wanted to give you a few basic strategies about Puerto Rico. Now, when you show this to other people, don't let them see this part. Then you'll be really cool because you'll be able to win. Yay. So anyway, there are a few basic strategies you can use. Strategy number one is the corn strategy. In the corn strategy, you want to get as much corn as you can. You get lots of corn. It doesn't require you to have buildings to produce it. You can get the corn. You ship it on a regular basis. You might want to get the harbor to get yourself more victory points when you ship the corn. You might want to get a wharf so you can always ship your own corn. The markets can be very helpful because you can get more money. You can sell your corn for money, so you just get lots of corn. Another strategy is the building strategy. With the building strategy, you're going to buy lots of buildings as fast as you can and try and end the game before other people get their strategies really going. With that, you could get lots of points through buildings. And the way that one works is anytime you can build, you should build. Even if the building's not useful to you and it might only cost 1, get it to fill up your space because you're trying to end the game by filling up the top. A third strategy is the factory strategy. With the crap, they're coming. With the factory strategy, what you're going to do is get the factory, and that gives you more money based upon the number of different types of goods you produce. So you get the factory and you make sure and just produce one of each type of good. That gives you a lot of money and you can build those big buildings. So there's 3 different strategies to get you going in Puerto Rico. I gotta go. Bye.